This is Matthew McConaughey.
Natalie Portman.
James Patterson.
Michael Ian Black.
And you are listening to
5 Questions
with Dan
Schawbel.
Joyanne, welcome to 5 Questions.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So happy to have you on here. And congrats on the new book.
Aha.
It's like the first time I've ever got it in frame, too, by the way. It's kind of hard to know exactly with the camera. So I'd love to start off, like, what are some of the key moments and experiences that have shaped your career in journalism and broadcasting?
You know, what's interesting, I would say the key experience that's wound up shaping my career was actually quitting broadcasting. I was actually leaving because I used to work for a local news outlet. First of all, for a Fox affiliate in Miami, and then I worked for an NBC affiliate. And I actually quit in 2004 because I was very against the Iraq War and also the way that the media was covering it. I felt that, that my industry was, too jingoistic, rooting for the violence. And I just felt I couldn't do this anymore. So I actually quit. And that actually wound up shaping my career because I wound up working for this organization called America Coming Together. It was a big PAC. George Soros, put $260 million into it, trying to defeat George W. Bush as like an outside group. But through that, I gained so many incredible contacts, including the contacts that put me on the Obama campaign toward the end of that campaign in 2008. But it also, in between those two campaigns, put me on the radio. And so I wound up after, George W. Bush won and the mission was not complete. I had to figure out what else to do because I wasn't going back to, at that point, I didn't think I was ever going back to TV. So I wound up working in radio as first as a producer and then as a producer co-host for my mentor, James T. in Miami. And I think radio is the best training for a broadcaster. It is just this incredible medium where you have this interactivity with the audience, where I was doing the research for the segments. I did a news segment, where I would have my little moment to get on and do the news, and I would interact with James T. as a host and ultimately became his co-host. And I think that experience shaped me as a broadcaster more than anything else. And if you think about it, like some of the best cable news broadcasters, Reid, Rachel Maddow, were radio hosts. It just is the best training for what I do now.
Definitely, yeah. And I've talked to a lot of, people on TV, and some of them at least have experience in radio. So that definitely holds true. Speaking of journalism, like, what role do you believe journalism plays in advancing conversations around social justice specifically, and how can the media contribute to positive change?
Wow. I mean, the media right now, I don't think is doing a great job of contributing to positive change, because I think the media writ large is resistant to becoming a voice in terms of social justice. The media desperately wants to be neutral, wants to be out of the fray and just say this is what happened and that's what happened. And on the one hand, on the other hand, and on the one hand, on the other hand is actually averse to social justice, right? Because there are no two sides to civil rights. People's rights should not be a debate. Either they deserve them or they don't. And so the media, I think for a long time, has tried to put itself down the center. It's the moments when it can't, when the media is sort of forced to take a side, when it actually does contribute to change, right? It's that moment when the media, like, in the 1960s, after, 40 years of Black journalists demanding that, lynching not be covered as this neutral event. Ida B. Wells, was the main leading voice in saying that the way that lynching was covered in the early 20th century, it was taking a side by not taking a side, by just sort of, clinically reporting these lynchings. And so you had Black journalists, like led by her, demanding that change. And by the 1960s, it kind of did. Once television was going down into the South and looking at this situation where it was not on the one hand, on the other hand, there was a victim, there was a villain. And as the media started to cover it that way, television became a key component of changing this country and moving it forward on civil rights, because activists, particularly younger activists like Martin Luther King Jr., who was, in his 20s, when he first started doing his activism in the 50s, they understood the power of this medium. And they used the power of television, of making, these white sheriffs beat them on TV, of making them fire hose children, but on TV. rather than anonymously and outside of the view of cameras or only in the eye of still cameras, really both the still, media, the still photos, but really television, and getting segregationists to get on TV and say, nah, I think the blacks are happy with segregation because they also thought they could use television. And it literally changed the course of this country because people had to witness the evil, right? And when they did, people recoiled from it. And so the media can sometimes accidentally produce social change. And I will say one more thing about that is that change in the way the media approached the relationship between African Americans and the country writ large and the sort of Jim Crow South, but even in the North, right? Segregation was covered in the North as well by TV, by NBC News and CBS News, et cetera. That produced the backlash that produced right-wing media. Roger Ailes and others, they caught on to that to say, oh, the media is biased. It's not that the media hates segregation. The media hates white conservatives. The media hates white Christians. When Walter Cronkite uses his incredible pulpit as the most trusted man in America to say the Vietnam War couldn't be won, the right says, oh, the media hates the military. The media hates America. And so it produced this opportunity to create an alternative to that was fair and balanced, that's going to let conservatives feel that they actually are in the center of the conversation and the media is to the left. So in a way, that rebound has produced even more sort of, striation in American society, produced, more silos because people have decided, I don't want to have CBS, ABC, and NBC tell me that my side is biased, my side is racist, my side is misogynist, my side is anti-LGBTQ. I don't want to hear it. I'm going to put myself in a box where I can only hear that my side is right. So in a way, the media has helped civil rights. And in a way, the media becoming more sort of getting off the fence has really helped to make our country more polarized.
Very interesting. From a historical standpoint, kind of leading up to where we are today, especially in today's world of social media, it feels like everyone's in their own echo chamber with all these algorithms and everything. But a lot of that news still starts with TV. So it is kind of a really important reminder that, TV still holds this like really powerful force in society. And, for better or worse, right? The double-edged sword that you're explaining, and kind of leads to this next question about your new book. Congratulations. What inspired you to write a book about Medgar and Myrlie Evers, and why did you decide to publish it in an election year?
I know. Great timing. Like I had so much time last year because I was working on this book actually for 2 years. What prompted me to do it was meeting Myrlie Evers. I had, admired her from a distance for a really long time. And I finally got to meet her in 2018. We were out in LA shooting my previous show, my weekend show, AM Joy, and she was a guest on the show. I'd interviewed her before, but only remote. This is the first time I'd actually met her in person. And I just was so taken with her. She's such a regal figure. She's such a brilliant woman. And it just really prompted me to realize how little even I knew. And I'm a history nerd. I knew who Medgar Evers was. I knew he had died in 1963. But I didn't really know who he was. And so it kind of set me off on this journey to really dig in more about both of them and their history as civil rights leaders. And when the other piece of it was that the way when we just had our casual conversation off air, talked about Medgar, I said to her, Miss Myrlie, he's been gone for 60 years and you sound like a newlywed. She loves this man. I have never really known anyone. I love my husband, but I've never seen anybody love anybody the way this woman loves that man to this day. And she had a second husband, but even he understood that Medgar Evers was the love of her life. And the way she spoke about him, I said to her, Miss Myrlie, this is a book. You should write this. And she said, I wrote 2 books. I'm not writing any more books. And she did. She wrote 2 great memoirs, one just 4 years after he was killed, one in the 90s where she talked about her own journey. So I read those books. And I read a little bit more. There's some other really good long histories of Medgar Evers. Obviously, Manning Marable helped Myrlie compile his papers. And it just, I said to my editor at HarperCollins, I think this is the book because no one has really written about civil rights leaders in a way that takes their life out of the compartment of being civil rights leaders. These men were, first of all, very young. All of them were in their 30s. Or they started in their 20s. They were like Black Lives Matter activist age, right? And they were fighting for their lives in incredible peril against the Klan and all of the forces of government that were set against them in an era where there was no protection. There was no, Black Lives Matter. There was no way to protect themselves. And they had wives who, in the case of people like Myrlie Evers and Betty Shabazz and Coretta Scott King, were literally 1950s housewives. And that means were the secretary, the cook, the cleaner, the laundry lady, and also the support and the advisor. And they don't get enough credit. And so I think, to me, I was like, if you're going to write about civil rights leaders and the greats, James Baldwin called Medgar, Malcolm, and Martin the great triumvirate of civil rights. You have to write about their whole lives. And that includes the loves of their lives. So I wanted to do a joint biography that would bring that whole story together and tell this incredible love story and remind people that we know so much more about Malcolm, and we know so much more about Malcolm X and Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. But Medgar was the first nationally known civil rights leader to get assassinated. And he was assassinated 5 years before Dr. King. He was assassinated 2 years before Malcolm X. And so because he was the first to be assassinated, Myrlie was the first national level civil rights widow, and she had to write a playbook that was not written. She had to figure out, how do I navigate this world of suddenly being a national figure? And I'm 32 years old and I have 3 children and they are without their dad. And I saw him bleed out in front of me, and they did too. How do I deal with this? I have a 9-year-old, an 8-year-old, and a 3-year-old, and I've never been on TV. And I walk out and Dan Rather is in my face and all these cameras are in my face. What do I even do? And so I wanted to write about how she had to figure out what to do, and also his more complex story, his World War II service, and how that awakened him to what he deserved in America. And he always knew, because they were a special family. The Everses were a very distinct kind of Black folk. Like, they were like in your face Black folk in Mississippi, which is very dangerous. But there's a whole great story there that comes from them as, it's enslaved, these people, they were the grandchildren of enslaved people, to become the Everses that we know. And I'll tell you one interesting piece of it. I mean, Myrlie Evers literally knew her grandmother that was a slave. Like, she would lay in her lap. This lady who was so slavery is so close in our history that literally somebody like Myrlie Evers, who's alive today, knew and hugged and was held by a former enslaved person.
Wow. Yeah, and for the book, one of the exercises you did, obviously as part of your research, was you interviewed Myrlie and her family. Through those interviews, what most surprised you or furthered your understanding of that time period?
I think the thing that most surprised me was how reluctant an activist wife Myrlie was, and how resistant she was to it. You just sort of get the sense, when you think about civil rights, you think about it as everyone was all in, like everyone was down for civil rights. The truth is, very few people were down for it, even in the Black community, because people were scared. It's not because people didn't want to be free. It's that people were terrified. And so, Medgar was encountering these terrified people in the Delta who lived still on plantations, who were still just above slavery. They made very little money. They couldn't leave the plantations. They were trapped there, and they were afraid to even talk, because people, I think, in this contemporary world don't realize, up until like the 1960s, it was perfectly legal to kill Black people in America. Like, you actually legally could kill any Black person you wanted without consequence. Really, I think the first actual, convictions of a white person for killing a Black person, that might be in the 90s. That's when Medgar Evers' killer was finally sent to prison. But it was legal. Like, you could just do it. And so Black people knew that. And so when Medgar Evers, she gets with this guy who she knows is an activist, he's like a Pan-Africanist, he's like all into Kenya's Mau Mau revolution, and even wants to name their son Kenyatta. And she's like, what? A Black kid named Kenyatta is not going to live to be 12. What are you talking about? And so he's this activist, pro-Black. He's telling her, don't relax your hair, like all of that. He's pro-Black before pro-Black is a thing. She was terrified to be with him. But at the same time, she loved him so much that she was willing to put up with the terror. So I think that was the thing that most surprised me, was the humanity of just how resistant she was, but the fact that she was such a strong and brilliant and incredible heroic human that she did it anyway.
And what's your best piece of career advice?
My best piece of career advice is to not be afraid of adventure. And when I say that, don't be afraid to just leave what you're doing and do what you love. You know, I have quit more jobs than I will say on this podcast. That if you're dissatisfied with the thing that you're doing for money, think about doing something for love. And that is not easy to do, actually. It is really not easy to do. And it's a risk that you have to take. I did not come from money. I did not have a mom with money. I was an orphan by the time I was 17. I didn't have no parents. But I was unwilling to do something just for money that made me unhappy. When I quit my job at WTVJ, the NBC affiliate, I thought that was the end of my career in news, but I did something I was passionate about instead. I got into politics and elections and passionately tried to get George W. Bush out of that White House. And I failed to do that. But then it forced me, because, my mom was this adventurous person. I mean, she left Guyana, went to England in her 30s and came to the United States, went to Iowa, went to New York. She's like an adventurous person. We were the road trip family. So I kind of developed that sense of adventure. But that sense of adventure will actually give you great joy, because when you're doing something that you actually love to do, you're not really working, right? You're just living, and the thing you're doing, somebody is compensating you for it in some way. And I think this young generation really gets that on an organic level that we Gen Xers don't, that you need to actually have joy, not just after work, but in work. And so if you can try to find something that makes you happy, that makes you joyful, that is the greatest employment. And if you can't do that at work and you just need to work to live and pay your bills, then find some joy outside of that and in your life and make yourself whole, because we are not what we do for a living. That is not who we are. Our work is not our identity. Your identity is the thing that you put out and create and put out into the world. So if that means you're doing your little TikTok videos on the side of working, being a DoorDasher, do that. Be that. And don't be afraid to have the adventurous spirit, to be your whole self and live your whole full life.
And being adventurous is also somewhat a way of saying, take some risks.
Yes.
Whether it doesn't have to be financial, it could be an emotional risk to just put yourself out there.
Totally. And the thing is, risk taking is sort of portrayed as like a negative thing. Like risk taking is like bungee jumping, which I do not recommend, because I would never.
That's supposed to be like the most dangerous thing you could do.
It's ridiculous.
It's probably more dangerous than like swimming like in a cage, like next to a great white shark.
Totally. I mean, sharks like naturally want to eat you, but the bungee, that little rubber band, it has no love for you. It's going to let you hit the ground. Okay. So people sort of portray risk as that, like jumping out of a plane or something. But no, risk can also just be, as you said, trying a new job, trying new food, traveling somewhere you've never been, getting in a car and driving somewhere you don't know. But be smart. Like, don't take crazy risks. Like, don't throw all your money into a crazy bad investment and end up poor. Don't do risks that are silly. But have enough of a sense of confidence in yourself to know what it is that you really truly are and who you really truly are, and try to pursue it. Even if you're not doing it in a way that's big and has hundreds of thousands or millions of followers, even if it's just for your little 300 followers or whatever, if it makes you happy and it gives you joy, pursue it. Pursue it not to the detriment of your actual life and your ability to pay your bills and your rent, but pursue it so that you can feel the joy of it.
Well, that's great advice. And thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you so much for having me, Dan. This was fun.